Okay, so I have the 2 pocket flaps basted to the top, buttonholes are done, and moving on to the yoke. Okay, so I've moved on to attaching the yoke to the front part of the jacket, and it's basically the pocket flap, it's sandwiched in between here. There's your pocket flap. So I'm just going to stitch this at the normal 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and let's change this back to a normal stitch length because I did turn it up to about 4 when I was top stitching, 3.5 or so. And I did change the pressure adjustment on this machine down to 1 because it is pretty bulky. All right, so let's see what that looks like. It looks pretty good. So the directions now state to turn the seam allowance up to the yoke, towards the yoke, and then top stitch again. So I will do my top stitching off camera. Okay, so next step, we're taking the back piece, and the back piece I believe was number 5, and we're stitching right sides together the yoke piece to the back piece, right sides together. Okay, so here we go. Just stitching the back yoke onto the back at the traditional 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to make sure I move these pins out of the way. And this machine, the HZL F600 Juki, it's not a bad machine. It's actually a great machine. It's not an industrial, but it does have some pretty heavy-duty capabilities. It sews denim, you know, without an issue. So once this part is done, the next thing I'm going to do is to turn up that seam allowance towards the yoke here. Seam allowance, which is here, turn that up towards the yoke, and then I'll do the top stitching. But again, I just do the top stitching off camera because some may choose to top stitch, you know, some may not choose to top stitch. Keep watching, guys. Okay, so moving on to the shoulders, I have the back piece with right sides together to the front at the shoulders pinned, and I'm just going to stitch across the top. And after that's done, we're pretty much done with the main portion of the jacket. I'll be moving on to the placket, or it's called the band number 14 on this one, and I'll be stitching that front band to the front part of the jacket. And that's basically where your buttons are going to go. Okay guys, so this is my progress. I do have to make an edit for those of you that are savvy and have caught the fact that I stitched my yokes backwards. I had the right on the left and the left on the right. So if you followed me verbatim from the beginning and you came up with a curvature throughout here and you're like, what the heck is that? Is that a part of the neckline or the armhole? Well, it should have been a part of the armhole. So if you look over here, once you pin those side seams together, it's a nice continuous round armhole, the way it's supposed to be. And this is the portion of your placket that's going to be up here. The instructions call it a band that goes into the lapel of the jacket. So I apologize for that, but you should have more of a triangular piece here at the neckline as opposed to that weird curvature, and then the nice armholes that meet together here. Okay, so I don't know what I was doing, I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm fully coherent now. Keep watching, guys. Bye. Okay, so moving on to the neckline, I'm going to stay stitch the neckline, and then I'm going to take the collar piece and then just reinforce the edges here where it turns into the lapel stitch. I think it calls for 5/8 of an inch as your normal seam allowance, but I'm going to reinforce inside of that seam allowance, so I'll do about 3/8 of an inch from the edge up to the square, and then the same thing on this side from the edge up to the square, just to reinforce. So that's the collar, and then just stay stitching, probably again at about 3/8 of an inch to be inside of the normal seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch, so it does not show on the outside. And that just really helps to keep the collar sitting nicely on the neckline to strengthen that area. That's the purpose. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Once you got a lot of fabric here, you just gotta make do, but luckily this table that comes with the Juki, the extended table, allows for bulkier fabrics to be able to handle, and of course my table is extra large itself. To allow me to be able to stretch these big fabrics out. So it's not a big deal if I'm doing a gown or a big skirt, or even these jackets and coats that I do quite often. All right, so we've stay stitched along the neckline. So we're gonna put the jacket aside. Okay, so this is our collar piece. I believe this is piece number 6. Instructions called for taking the interface portion, measuring 5/8 of an inch, and we're going to fold that down in between both of the squares, 5/8 of an inch, and press. And then we're going to stitch the collar sections together. Let me check that instruction sheet really quick again. It says, let's see here, stitch collar sections together, leaving the notched edge open. So we're going to stitch from the side of the collars to the bottom, up to the opposite side, leaving that top section that's the notched edge open that you've turned down and pressed. And then we'll meet back again, turning the collar right side out. We'll press it again according to the next step of instructions. And then if you choose to do any top stitching, we'll top stitch the outside. And then we'll be attaching the collar. It's moving along nicely. Okay, for view A, moving on to the sleeves, we're going to turn in 1/4 of an inch on the undersleeve number 7. So I've marked this area here of 1/4 of an inch from the end of the fabric. Press that edge in as you're folding it in. And then you're going to turn the extension to the inside again along the fold line and pressing it, stitching in place close to the pressed under edge. So we're going to fold in once 1/4 of an inch and fold in a second time and press a second time along that fold line and press a second time, and then you're going to stitch that area close in place, stitch close in place to that edge, pressed edge. Okay, so turn in twice, press close to the edge. Okay, so we're finished the folding of the sleeve edge of part 7, the undersleeve. The larger one is the upper sleeve here, and we're pinning them together at the back edges. This is where we're forming the cuff here at the back. So what you should be left with on the outside, you should have a double notch here on piece 8, and you should have a double notch over here, piece 7. And that corresponds to what you see on the instructions here. We're going to do that to the same one on the other side, and then we're going to stitch at the regular 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, And we're going to make sure that we leave everything free, stitch from the top all the way to the bottom, leaving everything free below that large circle. All of that's going to be left open. And again, that's where we're going to be forming our cuff. Okay, so still working on the sleeves. This is my undersleeve here. The instructions state to turn the seam allowances. We've made our narrow hem here on both of the sides of the sleeve. We're going to press the seam allowances towards the upper sleeve. So this is the undersleeve. We're going to turn it this way towards the upper sleeve. And once you turn everything over, it should look like this. And this is where you're going to do your top stitching. So basically my top stitching, I'm just going to make sure, since it's a lighter color, I'm just going to go over the existing stitch line that I have here. And that kind of closes and seals this area here, because you'll be making your pleat and your cuff along the bottom portion. Okay, so there's a view of my pleats here at the bottom, just basted. That's the sleeve. So now we're going to move on to work right sides together. We're going to pin our sleeve to the armhole edge, matching all of your notches and the large circle to the shoulder seam. Baste it, check for fit first, of course on yourself or your dress form if it's for someone else. For fit, if it's good, then you'll stitch it and turn the seam allowances inside towards the jacket. Next, if you're going to top stitch, you're going to be top stitching 1/4 inch of away on the jacket from the armhole seam here. So we're going to work on pinning in the sleeve, basting and stitching the sleeve into the armhole, and then doing any top stitching. Okay, so moving on to this sleeve, there's a lot of bulk here, so I've got all of the bulk to the left here. What you're looking at here is the actual portion of the, this is the collar here, and that's the piece of the back yoke connected to the front yoke here. So we're just stitching the sleeve in at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and the side seams are still open. Just taking your time, making sure there's no puckers. Keep smoothing it and pulling the bulk down as I sew. And of course, moving those pins as well. As I turn this out, I want to check, as I turn it out, I want to check for any visible signs of puckering. So let's start with, get a handle on what we're looking at here. This is the front portion here, that looks good. That's on the side seam, that looks good here, along the back. Looks perfect all around, and that's what you want. Okay, so now we're going to move on to sewing up the side seams and the remainder of the sleeve. Okay, here guys, we're going to be pinning the side seams and stitching from the bottom all the way to the top, following the sleeves here. This is where the sleeve and the armhole meets the side seam. Taking the sleeve all the way up. So you're going to stitch it in one continuous piece from the top all the way to the bottom. We're going to do that on both sides. Okay, Okay, so I'm starting here at the bottom of the jacket, stitching the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and one continuous seam all the way up around the sleeve. Okay, finally moving on to the cuffs. We're looking at the directions of this area right here. So we're gonna take each of our cuffs that we've interfaced already and we're going to press under 5/8 of an inch, just like this. I've marked with my tailor's chalk just to make sure it's accurate there. And then we're going to press that area. Once that's done, we're going to trim it down to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so here's my edit to this part of the video. If you guys remember when I said I was going to top stitch and bring the seam allowances together and top stitch over, that was incorrect. This area has to be open at the cuff. This is what I get for sewing when I'm tired, right? It has to be open like this at the bottom so that your cuff can attach to it. What I've done on this side was top stitch everything down. So I've had to go back and pick that open up to that circle. Remember, it was at the circle and you sewed all the way down in the sleeve and everything below the circle you left open. So I've got to go back and do that to pin the cuff. So I'll be doing that off camera. But we will be attaching the raw edges of the cuff around the sleeve, taking care that the little small circles that you have on each side will be placed at each of the openings, like on the picture. Okay, so I've sewn this cuff on all the way around the sleeve here at the bottom. At this point, I'm just going to test it, on myself, but since this is for someone else, I use the dress form to do the testing, and you would really need the arm circumference at the lower arm as well as the wrist primarily when you're testing this. And according to the directions, the next step was to fold along the fold line, right sides together. And then you're going to stitch those ends closed so you have a nice clean finish. And then basically this part here where you folded the inside in, that's going to be your internal facing to be able to cover everything that's on the inside. And that's pretty much, it. Once that's done, we're going to work on, you could either do a snap closure here or a button, but I probably will go ahead and do the button since I have buttons everywhere else on the front of the placket as well as on the flaps, so to keep everything uniform. But I think snap closures would work just as fine if you want the easy route. So closing up that sleeve, and I have decided on the interior part to add a lining. You could do the Hong Kong finish, you could use the bias binding, you could zigzag to do all of those denim areas that fray easily. I would highly recommend to finish those edges if you're going to do any type of denim coats or jackets, to finish your edges with something, just so that, unless you want the frayed look, and if you want the frayed look, that's totally fine. That's up to you or your client. Okay, so I'm going to work on this off camera and then I'll meet you back. Thanks for watching, guys. For those that of you are new, please like, comment in the channel. It really helps these channels to grow. It helps the YouTube algorithm to push this video out into the YouTube world for others to find me. And also consider following. Hit that subscribe